more modern technology comes from quantum science. Okay? Comes from quantum science. But now here's what Einstein says. This idea of interconnecting quantum science, social justice, and agriculture. He says we can't solve our problems of today with the same way of thinking that we used when we created them. Now, what does he mean by that? Now, here at Turner College, some of you all might be first-year students, fourth-year students. But I'll bet, I could be wrong, but I'll bet in all your classes, I bet you haven't been asked, what did he mean by this? And what does your curriculum have to do with this need to think beyond our worldview that developed the problems today? Center College, EKU, UK, U of L, probably doesn't have a curriculum based around this statement. But, in my view, it's one of the most profound statements of this century. And we're not addressing it. Next slide. What he meant, in my estimation, by we can't solve today's problems, the way they created, he says, this idea of Newtonian Cartesian view of the world developed some 500 years ago in Europe, around, between like 1400, 1500s, is how we think today. All the university curriculum, all the university structures, how you lay out the campus, how you design a city, how you do science, is all based upon this Newtonian Cartesian view of the world, which was a worldview that was new in terms of humankind. Before, millions of years before, humans hadn't thought that way, this way, of things being separate. The way you understand the world is divided up, dissected, tear it apart, and then you understand it. Humans didn't think about way over there is the environment, and we're not even part of it. This is how this thinking has been laid out. It's given rise to what we call science. It's given rise to what we now call the Industrial Growth Society. But I maintain that you as students should go to the college president, board of trustees, your professors, and say, teach us quantum science. Teach us the new science. Devise a curriculum based upon quantum science, which means beyond just the idea of quanta, atomic particles, quarks, muons, dark matter. Beyond that, quantum science says we're all from the same source. We're all condensed stardust in human form. We're all interrelated. We're all interconnected. We're all interdependent. That's what quantum science teaches. Which is very similar to what we tend to call indigenous and spiritual teachings. Okay? So what we're saying is that Newtonian science is more homocentric. Quantum science is more earth-centric. Next slide, please. Now, again, this is going to be like the scapular bone, or it could be the humerus, or it could be, the radius of the ulnar bone of this topic. I can't go into all the details of this idea of quantum or Newtonian science, what it meant 500 years ago, how it changed how humans view the world and each other. Here's just two books. All the books I'm listing here on this sheet here, okay? Easy pickings. The Turning Point, these are people, friends of mine. We worked together a number of years. This is in California. Turning Point is a great book to kind of get the sense of Newtonian science vis-a-vis quantum science. Next slide. So Einstein says that human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical illusion of his consciousness. This delusion that we're all part of is like a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to, next slide, and to our affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. Next slide. That's why I bought all this stuff up here. Okay? Rocks, shells, wood, feathers. For the times we talk about the natural world in these classrooms, but we don't bring the energy and the spirit of those things along with us. That's that homocentric view. We talk about, I'm sure you all do in your class, about the environment, about climate change, about water issues. But you don't bring the spirit of the water to the conversation because we think it doesn't matter. Now, not just Einstein, but many other thinkers have had very, very similar statements. Chief Seattle says, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together, all things connect. Next. And also, George Washington Carver. You have heard of him. Spent almost 50 years at Tuskegee University talking about quantum thinking, social justice, civil rights, and ag transformation. He talked about it, wrote about it, prayed about it, whatever else. He says, an injustice to the soil is an injustice to the farmer, and injustice to the farmer is an injustice to the soil. That's what quantum science says. We're all interrelated. Soil becomes us. And what he was saying was, quietly, he was saying, the black farmers in the South have just been emancipated. We got to find a way that emancipation means rights and freedom. Freedom from poverty, the right to education, the right not to be lynched. And that how we were doing ag in the South, growing mostly cotton, was creating in the soil an infertility. So his work was this idea of connecting. Next. So part of our work is to move from Newtonian science to viewing the earth as mother. Next slide. So if the earth is mother, then everything on the earth are her children. We talk about building bridges. Okay, about building bridges. Community Day. Here is our community. And it's not just human people, it's plant people, animal people, rock people, water people, and they're all part of our family. That's Newtonian science. That's indigenous thinking, and so forth. Next one. Now, this connection with agricultural transformation. This image here is actually a mural that some young people I've worked with several years ago called the Youth Green Corps designed after we had a similar kind of a conversation. This epitomizes that some 12, 15,000 years ago, it was women that developed agriculture. Okay? And all of the other arts that we now have come from this foundation of agriculture that women developed. What also happened 12,000, 15,000 years ago was this entrenchment of patriarchy, the oppression of women, subjugation of women, violence towards women during this period. But agriculture provided for humans a leap in development. It allows us to be sedentary, to be in one spot, to grow food, and develop all the arts. Today we're sitting here in this classroom because somebody else is growing food. Okay? That's why we can sit here. So all the things that we do are based upon the foundation of food and agriculture. But we're not taught that. Next slide. Now, one great example of connecting this idea of agricultural transformation and social justice is this dear friend, Wangari Maathai out of Kenya, who developed what's called the Green Belt movement, where her concern was the oppression of women in Kenya and the lack of trees. Out of came what's called the Green Belt movement. Next slide. And in planting millions of trees and organizing women, she was able to topple what's called the Moi. That's the guy who was the dictator or the leader of Kenya, named Moi. Toppled him, helped organize in Kenya a parliamentary kind of a government, got chosen to be on the parliament, and won a Nobel Peace Prize. That's one example of the connection between the idea of quantum thinking, social justice, and ag transformation. Next one. Now, moving from Kenya to the United States, our country's founding was based upon two things: stolen land from indigenous people, and then stolen labor from African people. That's how we were founded. But we stole land, I say we, as a country embracing our history. We stole land, we stole people to do what? To do agriculture. So the foundation in our country of injustice is based upon food and agriculture. So it also serves as a pivot point for transforming injustice in other institutions. This is how the country looked 500 years ago, with 400 or 500 nations of people all throughout North America. Next slide. Of course, here's North America in one symbol. Next one. But it's called Turtle Island by indigenous people. How often do we refer to it? How often do we even understand? How often do we do art with turtles as a way to bring the energy of that culture to our daily lives? Next one. Next one. Now, in Montana, they have a state law. It's called Indian Education for All, K through 12. Preschool to high school, every student has to learn about Native Americans in Montana. What if every college, like Center, EKU, Western, U of L, said, if you all are here as Center students, we all have a curriculum. Because these folk have been here in North America, called Kentucky, 10, 15, 20, I'm saying 30,000 years. They might know something. Next slide. So again, looking at this question of displacement, enslaving of African people, next slide, we recognize that it was about agriculture. The big crop back then, as you know, was cotton, and the raising of cotton, and the lands became infertile. The people were oppressed, and they couldn't express their freedom, their humanity. Next slide. Even after emancipation, a lot of our folk, including my people, my family, were put in what's called sharecropping systems, which kind of continued the levels of oppression in agriculture. Next one. But along comes this guy here again, George Washington Carver. He connected science and religion, didn't separate them. And is one of the greatest quantum thinkers in our country that connected quantum science and ag transformation. He was trying to protect, preserve the black soils in Alabama, return to them fertility, but he was also trying to protect, help support the black souls of people in Alabama and throughout the South. Next one. Carver, oftentimes is saying, well, you know, Carver wore a flower every day. Every morning he went outside before daybreak, talked to the flowers, talked to the trees. He asked them to reveal their secrets to him. And they did. He would come into the laboratory and he would then execute what the flowers and trees would tell him. But how often do we, at a center, at a UK, at any college, tell students, oh, what's up with that tree? That's part of your experience. Because we're told they don't know anything. We can't talk to them. And what do they know? But this guy talked to him. Next slide. Even as importantly, Carver and Henry Ford were great friends. They developed the whole, now called a green vision, of building almost everything in the industrial sector from agricultural products grown by U.S. farmers. They were opposed to focusing on fossil fuels from other countries. Ford, I mean, it's a great book, you know, where he made his cars, he made the body out of soybeans. I recall it's an image of the video, him hitting hitting the hood of the car and bouncing off, made from soybeans. But these guys died. People forgot about them. And then we devoted our whole economy around fossil fuels. And now we're challenged by that. That was their vision. Because we kind of forgot about the vision of Carver and Ford, and by the way, Carver was good friends with Edison, Einstein, and they all regarded Carver as the greatest scientist of the era. Every school ought to be studying Carver. But what happened with this reliance on fossil fuels and this industrial agricultural method, we now have what we're eating up the earth in all kinds of ways. That's how we are globally, eating up the earth. Next slide. So this whole intersect of food and agriculture has us now out of balance. And our work, wherever we are, is how do we live, how do we study, how do we get degrees, how do we work with community to get the balance back in order. This earthly balance, that's our work. Next slide. In North America, if everybody in the world had the same carbon footprint as us as Americans, it would take 5 Earths to do it. But we only got 1. So part of our work is to live like we only have 1 Earth. With this last 100 years of the industrial growth society globally, we now have all these unraveling things going on, like financial meltdown, global warming, climate change, environmental degradation, increased population, ocean depletion, dead zones. I was in Florida on vacation a couple of weeks ago, a place called St. George Island, which is between south of Tallahassee, east of Panama City. And what's called the red tide was there. Dead fish everywhere. I kept coughing and sneezing, which was impacted by all the industrial runoff from farms in Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, that feed the Ohio River, Mississippi River, and the Gulf. As an example of how we need to transform agriculture. Next slide. So, all these unraveling points mean that we have to reinvent ourselves. Every institution, governments, especially education, have to reinvent ourselves. Now, I wonder when you all came here as first-year students, maybe for orientation, or if you get this and you come back in the fall, your work as a student is to help Center reinvent itself. Not just get a degree or be a part of fraternity and sorority, but to help us reinvent ourselves as an institution. That's what I maintain is part of your role. Next. So what we need is a different worldview, a different story. One that says that the earth is our mother, our home. Some use the word Gaia. It's like the Garden of Eden is the earth. It's a sacred planet. Next slide. Which means that we have to kind of begin living by at least 10 or more principles. Zero carbon, zero waste, local sustainable materials, sustainable water, culture and heritage, equity and fair trade, health and happiness. I can give you all if you need these slides, and that's not a problem. Okay. I'm trying to get these bones laid out here. Sustainability means whole system thinking. That's quantum thinking. We're all interconnected. Okay? Not Newtonian science. Biocentric or earth-centric focus. Learning innovation. Peace and democracy. Spirituality. Leadership. And partnership. Next. Now, I do about 40 presentations a year, and many of them involve in some way, most of them involve this idea of sustainability. And typically, maybe in your class, maybe you've seen something very similar. Typically, you see the concept described this way. That you've got three circles, two-legged stool, economy, they call it equity in society, and environment. Next one. And then somewhere in the middle of those circles is sustainability. Seen this before? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's how it's written typically. Next one. Well, what I began doing years ago was adding a faith component. Next one. Adding that faith component as being integral to whatever we're doing. But this concept is a Newtonian concept of 3 or 4 equal circles. Next slide. Next one. Next one. Here's a much better quantum view. The human economy isn't the same size as the environment. Newtonian science tells us that. This is a more accurate view. This big circle is the earth and the ecosystem. All of our human formations are all subsets of the larger, bigger circle. That's a more quantum view. Next. I helped write this book about 10 years ago. It's a great reference book around sustainability. I have in there several photographs as well. So there's some really good books that kind of give a more quantum view of sustainability. Next one. Now, I want to recommend this book here. It's called Planet U. Reinventing the University as if the Earth mattered. Much of what we learn in higher education is the Earth don't matter. We went around briefly around the campus, some of the buildings that have names. And they're named after people. And it's usually white men who give lots of money to build a building, and we name it after that person who gave them the money. But I'll tell you what, my billfold's over here. I could have millions of dollars, but I can't build granite. I can't build limestone. I can't build trees. I can't build oil that's been in the ground for millions of years. I can't make rubber from my dollar bills. We should name buildings after nature. These structures, the granite took millions of years. How do you quantify? Okay, Earth, you spent 500, million years making oil. What's that worth? What's the value of that? Anyway, this is an example of how we design campuses that says the Earth don't matter. Next one. Another great book. I spent 5 years in Detroit. I worked closely with the Kellogg Foundation. They developed this pamphlet here called Leadership Reconsidered, Engaging Higher Education and Social Change. What their projection was that higher education's purpose should be to prepare all of you all to be agents of change. That should be the purpose of higher education. Not to help you to become the best consumers or just a cog in the wheel, agents of change. Which is, you read the Declaration of Independence, it says, our country is founded upon liberty and justice for all. Then it says, if the government doesn't quite meet these ends, it is our what? It is our right to alter or abolish it. But we're not told that when you come to college. Your work is to become a citizen who's trying to perfect the democracy, an agent of change. Next slide. Great book. Talking about transforming agriculture and food. I wear a variety of hats with a variety of organizations. I spent a lot of time with the slow food movement. Here are some of our global projects from slow food, beginning in the 80s in Italy as an opposition to fast food. And that's a global network. We do 10,000 gardens in Africa. We do slow meat, slow wine, slow cheese, slow fish. We have a Terra Madre network. Every 2 years, we meet in Italy for Terra Madre, means Mother Earth. We bring together about 10,000 people, about 800 young people, many who are in college. I would advise you all to be writing now your proposal to Center College saying, send a bunch of us to Italy for Terra Madre next year, using the fall, September, October. And we can meet 800 other young people who are doing similar work. Go ahead, next one. So I'm saying, join the movement. Terra Madre, Mother Earth, part of the slow food movement. It's about transforming the local and global food and ag system. Next one. Another great resource about this idea of different things is Dirt the Movie. It's an incredible movie. It talks about people around the world and how different cultures have this whole sacred relationship with dirt. Because they understand that we're made from dirt. Now, if you're a Christian and you go to Genesis, it says God bent down and picked up clay, soil, and breathed the breath of life. And Adam and Eve, that's what it says in the Bible. Anyway, another bone, next one. Now, around the question of food justice, civil rights, social justice, agriculture. Some books are all on this list here. I recommend, all written by different, again, people I know personally. Farming While Black, Freedom Farmers, Color of Food, Each Other's Harvest, Touch of Courage, Land Justice. So again, you can get a hold of these books and maybe take this to the library and say, hey, library, what books do we have here in our library that are on this list? Okay? We want them in the library. We want to invite Leah Penniman down here to speak. Oh, things like that. Next one. This book here, this came out in April. I have an essay in it, and we're doing a lot of, of course, book signings and speaking, but it's kind of a book that's devoted to food and agriculture and the question of social justice, land justice, and how do we transform food and ag system. Next slide. This is the title of my essay in there, Ancestral Vibrations Guide Our Connection to the Land. And this is available. I have a few here with me, actually. I want one. It's available online as well. Next slide. Now, I'm about to close up here. This whole intersect quantum thinking, civil rights, social justice, ag transformation. This is a new book here, too. Just came out this year. Written by another friend of mine, a woman who is she's African American. She's like a black feminist astrophysicist. Oh man, that's a long title. Okay. Her work is to study things way out there. Way out there. Okay, part of her work. This book, however, is her approach to quantum thinking and how she applies this question of the cosmos, the oppression of women, racial injustice, science not being benign and neutral. It's an incredible book. I recommend, again, this is like the big bicep muscle, okay, on the skeleton. Next one. A few other pieces of information. A good friend of mine, Joanna Macy, has a concept called the Great Turning that incorporates all these things, called the Great Turning. That means we're just a paradigm shift, an epochal shift. That's what she is saying. Next slide. And she says that we're in this period of the Great Turning where we're moving away from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. That means you got to have times of three things: holding action, shifting consciousness, and structural change. Next one. And you can go to her website. She got all kinds of books and readings about this idea of the Great Turning. I spent about 5 years studying with her in various retreats. She says, well, future generations, if there is a livable world for them, will look back at this epochal transition we're making to a life-sustaining society, and they might well call this time of the Great Turning. So we're all part of the Great Turning. Next slide. Another complementary book, it's called The Great Work by a guy named Thomas Berry. He's written a bunch of books, Universe Story. This book here says we're moving what's called the Cenozoic period. If you understand paleontology, anthropology, the history of the earth, we're in this period of the Cenozoic period, and we're moving towards the Ecozoic. Idea again, from being homocentric to earth-centric. Wonderful book that helps guide this paradigm shift. Next one. I'm closing out now. Within this work, we use the butterfly as a metaphor for the human species. We say that we're still maturing as a species. So we think we're civilized, we think that we're already evolved. But if we were civilized as a species, we wouldn't poison the air, we wouldn't poison the water, we wouldn't pollute and poison the soil, we wouldn't do harm to women, because we all come through women if we were civilized. But we're approaching. So you all have a contribution to the human maturation. And the butterfly is an example of that. How as a caterpillar, where we are now as a species, that period of adolescence, we think we know everything, we're rambunctious, voracious, okay? That's how we are as a caterpillar. But we're in this period now, this paradigm shift. We go into a cocoon, next slide, in this period of transition. And then out of this caterpillar to a cocoon comes this new formation. From a caterpillar that can barely, in her whole life, walk 10 feet, to a butterfly that can fly like a monarch thousands of miles. That's what you all represent. This butterfly stage. Next slide. It's up to you to have this worldview. Next one. So, and then the next one. So in closing, my message is that you young people represent the leaders for a sustainable future. But to do that, you have to be the architects, the Imagineers, the visionaries, the marginal cells of the future, and not defenders of the decline. So, that's my conclusion.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, certainly.
Thank you.
Something I think a lot about as you were speaking, and like, what are you looking for? You guys?
Warren, go ahead. Go
All
ahead.
right.
Go ahead.
Is the idea of, it's a good question to kind of like think about in general. If it was impermissible for people to exploit the environment, would it be impermissible for people to exploit each other? Especially because of how interconnected issues of, you know, in America, food justice and civil rights, when people are exploited for their labor or exploited for their land. If it was possible, if it was impermissible to exploit the environment, would we have as many injustices in our world? And I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about that.
I think something to keep in mind with that is, I guess the idea of